From Kansas State University, this is Agriculture Today. Eric Atkinson with you. And ahead today, K-State's Dan O'Brien will talk about the prevailing thinking on 2019 corn and soybean acreage in the U.S. and about a possible pullback in Russian wheat exports, what that could mean for the wheat market during Dan's weekly segment on the grain market trends. Then K-State's Brian Briggeman and Mark Dikeman will take a look at a late-breaking development that you grain farmers and cooperatives should know about. It could have a one-time impact on a farmer's ability to claim a Section 199A tax deduction on grain sales. Mark and Brian will have the important particulars on that. And later on Kansas agricultural weather, K-State's Mary Knapp, right here on Agriculture Today. Agricultural producers, landowners, and creditors, you have a partner in your legal and financial needs. Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services offers reliable, trusted information and guidance. Whether you need advice for ag credit concerns or are transitioning your operation to the next owner, Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services can assist you in making sound decisions for your business. To learn more, call 800-321-3276 or visit us online. This is the K-State Radio Network, and welcome once again to Agriculture Today. It's our time to take a look at the grain market scene once again, and for that we go down the line to Dan O'Brien, grain market economist, K-State Research and Extension. But as we talk with Dan, he is currently on the circuit at K-State's soybean schools in western Kansas this week, and as you have interacted with growers not only there but elsewhere, Dan, you keep coming across these questions about the, to put it this way, row crop acreage shuffle, corn versus soybeans, and what's going to happen this spring, and that's still a reigning theme out there in the markets as well.
Yes, and for a time of year during January, February, where we at times have been complaining about the doldrums of no market news and just docile opinions about the market. We have anything but that right now. And, of course, the crop acreage issue is front and center, I think, with the soybean schools that we're having. Of course, the narrative in the market last October, November was that, gosh, with low prices, largely affected by trade disputes between the U.S. and China and tariffs and all of that, that we'd see a major drop-off in U.S. soybean acres this year and planted in 2019. The USDA came out, had a projection of about 6.5 million acres less, and they came out again October, November with those numbers. Here of late, with some dryness in South America, particularly in Brazil, that's adding uncertainty to their ability to supply all that they had last year into the soybean market, and some promise, of course, in trade discussions between the U.S. and China, and actually kind of a détente or a thawing of those here temporarily, probably not just coincidentally happening about the same time that Brazil was running out of their old crop soybeans, but that's another matter. So those two factors, along with the market facilitation payments that had been received of $1.65 a bushel for soybeans, we seem to be gaining a number of positive news items that are affecting people's thinking in the market. And now thoughts are more along the lines that instead of, say, a 6.5 million acre reduction in beans, that we'd see something along the lines of about half of that. And, of course, it's not a one-for-one trade, but to the degree that soybeans don't fall off so badly, or aren't expected now to fall off so badly in the three I states in the middle of the Corn Belt and, of course, everywhere else in the U.S. as well, but still, particularly in those main states, then the competitive crop for acres, corn would basically not see the requisite increase in acreage of quite so much. So now it's looking like something more along the lines of a 2.5 to 3 million acre switch. Again, a little bit more corn, a little bit less soybeans, but not with the major swings that were being talked about in the past. A factor also being considered in the market would be the, again, increasing skittishness and worry about just what the amount of winter wheat acreage will be here in the U.S. this year. Again, the late fall of 2018 for harvest affected, at least in our part of the country, that delayed harvest had some negative impact, probably appreciable negative impact on just how many wheat acres we had seeded. And then, again, kind of depending on just where you're at, you see a lot of varying reports, some anecdotal, about just the quality of wheat stands out in the country. We do have now some discussions amongst climatologists, ag meteorologists, that cold weather to come could affect winter wheat in some areas where we don't have a lot of cover, and add one more negative influence upon wheat production this year. So, gosh, just a lot of back and forth news and on acreage and production potential. We'll have to see where all that goes, but gosh, just a lot of uncertainty right now. That winter wheat seeding report that we missed with the government shutdown earlier this month going to turn out to be a pretty big issue. I think when we finally do get those numbers into the market, we'll just have to see what type of volatility and changes in perspectives on what the U.S. production will be this year. But still, lots of questions on the acreage side and anything but a settled deck as we head off into February and March.
Now, also swirling around in wheat circles, quite a bit of chatter, Dan, about Russia and potential wheat export reductions there, and some associated developments as well. And that does carry some weight in the market likewise, doesn't it?
Yes, news coming out of Russia that the Russian government seems to be getting involved with their export sector to monitor shipments, to ask literally on a periodic weekly basis what their shipments are, to even consider controlling wheat prices in the country, kind of following from the idea that they had such strong exports, such a strong pace that they may be running short on their ability to just stay involved in that market in the latter part of this marketing year, marketing year runs from June 1 to the end of May of next year. So if that occurs, coupled with, again, dry conditions affecting the quantity of the crop in Australia and periodic issues elsewhere, perhaps it's now leading to what had been thought would occur in the wheat market, that short supplies in some of these other major exporting countries would eventually result in the U.S., which has a de facto role of the supplier of last resort now in the wheat market, finally getting some wheat export business above just the so-so rates that we've been having. So that's something certainly to watch. And we look at weekly pace of exports, and it seems that there's a possibility of that occurring. Now, that leads right to really an important thing that's happening right now, and that's that, i.e., we know the shipments for these crops, corn, grain, sorghum, wheat, and soybeans, but we don't know what the forward purchases are, and that's as a result of not having the USDA Foreign Ag Service weekly reports that come out, where they report not just what's been shipped, but what the forward purchases are.
Market stakeholders are really shooting in the dark in as far as exports right now.
Really, the only people that know who's been contacted for forward sales are the major companies themselves. We don't want to get down on them because they didn't make this issue occur, but what we have right now is an issue that if these grains were purchased ahead for future delivery, the only people that know about it are the people in those companies. And what these reports were instituted for was for the purpose of having the whole public know, and not just the people that are involved directly in the transactions, but everyone else. What could occur, again, which is what occurred back in 1973 with the Great Russian Grain Robbery, as they called it. Again, there was no reporting. Russia, being a good, diligent buyer, did what any good buyer would do. They bought a little bit at a time, didn't get the market all riled up, and ended up, by the time it all came to light, that they had bought a lot of wheat for probably less than they would have had to have paid if the broader public knew, farmers included, that these purchases were going on. So here we have a period of time where China's come back in the soybean market. We have these issues happening with Russia now, and that could be affecting the wheat market. And corn pace has been running strong already, but rumors of China involvement potentially on that, really news all over the place. But we're vulnerable because we don't have these reports of not just the shipments, but the purchases. So when we do get those, and come to find out just what amount of these crops have been bought, it could be a really interesting and potentially volatile time in the market as we find out what, to the degree they did or didn't, actually, they being these other foreign buyers, did they come in and actually buy something ahead? So I guess this is what market information is for. And I'm not complaining or making a political statement at all, just saying that, gosh, by not knowing this, we could be seeing grain prices now being offered and bid at a lower rate than they would be otherwise if we had full market information with those reports coming out.
And to that point, the day-to-day market movements we see are more or less reflective of the trades standing by and awaiting confirmation on all of this then.
Yeah, and eventually that information, would show up in the cash market because buyers will be coming in and seeking to pull grain out of holders' hands. But, if you would hope that it wasn't asymmetric information, that both parties of those transactions had a good idea of what the actual demand was that was going on. And so that's what you'd be hoping for.
Right. Well, we appreciate the quick comments here, Dan, and good luck with the remainder of the soybean schools today in Northwest and in Central Kansas, as well as one next Monday taking place in North Central Kansas, Beloit. And we appreciate your time right here. Many thanks.
Thanks, Eric. Take care.
That's Dan O'Brien, grain market economist, K-State Research and Extension. And he shares his thoughts on the grain market trends and associated developments each Friday here on Agriculture Today. And just a quick footnote, Dan's colleagues in the Agricultural Economics Department at K-State have just posted, as of yesterday, updated grain basis maps for you producers to use. These are created from cash and futures prices that are collected and analyzed each week. These show current basis levels for wheat, grain sorghum, corn, soybeans. They show the difference between the current basis and the 3-year historical average basis for the same week and location. They're a great way to track basis trends in your area, and they're right there on the front page of the agmanager.info website. So simply go to agmanager.info. We'll be back in a moment on the K-State Radio Network.
Hamburgers, roast, ribs, steak, or whatever you prefer. Beef, it's what's for dinner. Kansas cattle farmers produce 7.5 million head of cattle per year. It takes about 7 tablespoons of peanut butter to get the same amount of protein in 1 serving of lean beef. Support your local Kansas farmers and ranchers. Eat beef. This message was brought to you by the K-State Animal Sciences Leadership Academy participants.
Agriculture Today continues on the K-State Radio Network. Now to enlighten you on a situation that has developed in the aftermath of the Tax Reform Act of 2017, and it has triggered a one-time issue that you agricultural producers and agricultural cooperatives may possibly have to contend with here as you're filing 2018 taxes this spring. We brought over 2 individuals who have studied this closely and, in fact, have co-authored an article on it concerning Section 199A deductions. Brian Briggeman is the director of the Arthur Capper Cooperative Center here at K-State, and Mark Dikeman is the associate director of the Kansas Farm Management Association. Brian, you might go back over the storyline that led to this situation.
Sure. Like as you mentioned, Eric, back in 2017, we had a tax reform, the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act of 2017. And when that first came out in late December, there was a lot of discussion around what became known as the grain glitch. So there was this new Section 199A that was introduced to replace the old Section 199, the Domestic Production Activities Deduction, or DPAD. But there were certain provisions within there that gave an incentive to producers to sell their grain to a cooperative. So there was a lot of discussion, but it came around when the Omnibus Bill in 2018 in March was passed. There was a correction to it, what came known as the fix to the grain glitch, essentially removing some of those incentives to sell to a cooperative. But still, there was still a benefit, through a Section 199A deduction that was there. Now, the fix is fairly complicated. I do have a fact sheet out there if somebody would like to go back and look to see how we go through and calculate everything. But just for purposes here, there was some changes, right, that again happened. Now, here this last December, in early January, now many tax advisors, and Mark included, came and asked me about this new transition rule that was put in back in March. So this is something that is, kind of on the forefront for many tax preparers who are working with their farmer clients on things. So Mark and I sat down and said, okay, we need to understand this transition rule a bit better. And what are the implications for farmers? And of course, with me being director of the Arthur Capper Cooperative Center, well, what does this mean for co-ops? What do co-ops need to be prepared for?
So we want to get into the core of the matter, which is this transition rule. And Mark, it is rather involved, but breaking it down, what does it entail and what's it going to mean for those parties that Brian just mentioned, producers and cooperatives?
Well, Eric, the idea behind the transition rule, as Brian mentioned it, the idea of the transition rule has been available to us since early in 2018. It wasn't, fully understood, or preparers weren't fully aware of the implications of the transition rule until just late December of 18, when the Joint Committee on Taxation released their Blue Book that provided some of their interpretation of what it meant for the transition rule. Essentially, what the transition rule means is that if a cooperative uses or counts grain that they purchase from a patron, if they use that purchase as part of their 199 deduction under the old rules, then that patron cannot use that grain sale to the co-op when calculating their 199A deduction. Now, since a lot of co-ops work or operate on a fiscal year rather than a calendar year like most cash-basis taxpayers do, we run into a situation where there's some overlap between those taxable years. And that overlap is where this transition rule is coming into play and causing the problems. So what it means for a lot of patrons of co-ops is under 199A, many people would be able to take a 20% deduction essentially of their net farm income, with a few adjustments in certain cases, depending on what their income level is and wages paid and so on. But essentially a 20% deduction on their net farm income. Now, if we take out some of these grain sales to cooperatives that can't be included in this calculation, then instead of a 20% deduction, we may be looking at in some cases, if grain sales are heavily loaded towards the front of the beginning of the year, someone might not see any deduction at all.
So we're talking about thousands of dollars of difference.
Thousands of dollars for sure, yeah, and definitely a potential for a big swing in the 199A calculations for that patron or for that farm operator.
So this really pivots, Mark, around when that grain was sold because of these varying fiscal years under which individual cooperatives operate, right?
That's correct, yes. So grain sales that happen early in the year, like I mentioned, they may or may not be included in the calculations for that patron's 199A deduction. Many farmers, it's been their practice to hold over grain from the production year to the following year, sell early in the year. So income is heavily loaded towards the beginning of the calendar year. Expenses are heavily loaded towards the end. The result in this situation is less than desirable for those farm business owners.
One consideration, though, Brian, is that the cooperatives taking advantage of this will potentially pass that advantage along to patrons. So is that part of the relief here, or
right,
so to say?
Well, for the cooperative, the decisions have already been made. They make their decisions, for the fiscal year end, for their particular case. So there's really not much that a cooperative at this point in time can do. But yes, if a cooperative had passed through some of their DPAD to their patrons, like many co-ops out there who take the DPAD, they do pass through. Yes, that would provide some relief. So those, the thousands of dollar reduction that the farmer might see or the patron might see wouldn't be as of a significant of a drop. There's also other methods that co-ops have used and will help with that too, especially if they are issuing non-qualified stock or non-qualified equity. There are some additional tax advantages with that as well that can help to offset some of that taxable income. So there are things that are out there, but again, the transition rule is a one-time thing, and we're working through it. So cooperatives and patrons of cooperatives need to know that going forward that the 199A is what will be, they'll be subject to on the deduction.
For the here and now, Mark, you and Brian are telling producers that they need to find out in some way, if they're not sure, when that grain that they sold to the cooperative was actually transacted.
That's correct, yes. So a good set of records for each of those farms is going to be important to be able to identify when the grain was sold. It may involve contacting the cooperative to nail that down. You're also going to need to know what the ending fiscal year for that cooperative is. And I think it's important to note, too, that this doesn't apply to all grain sold to all cooperatives. If the co-op is treating those grain sales as what's referred to as per unit retain paid in money or per PIMS, then this transition rule does apply. If the co-op is not treating those sales as per PIMS, then it's business as normal for that farmer. If they sell to a non-cooperative, the transition rule is not of any consequence.
But this is of importance to the point where producers need to be in discussion with their tax preparer or their Kansas Farm Management Association economist to sort out what this means to their returns and their bottom line.
Yes, that's correct. It's important to know ahead of time what you might be facing. A lot of people did tax planning under the assumption that we were going to get the full 20% 199A deduction. And now that may or may not be the case, depending on the situation. But it's very important to talk to your tax preparer or your KFMA economist and fully understand how this situation affects you.
And I think that's really important because in the fact sheet that Mark and I wrote for every single producer, every single cooperative out there, it is going to differ. So anyone who might have a question of this, the first person you need to reach out to is your tax advisor, right? And work with them, your tax accountant, to say, okay, what is it that we need to be aware of? Does this apply to me? That's the first steps really for a producer, is to go there. And then if you need to follow up with a cooperative, as Mark said, co-ops out there need to be aware of, patrons might be calling and be ready to answer that question for their patrons.
And as per that fact sheet, which is a great reference on this matter, it is now posted on your website, Brian?
Right. It is available on accc.ksu.edu. And also the Capper Center fact sheets, we make them available on Ag Manager, so on agmanager.info. I know many of your listeners, Eric, are familiar with Ag Manager, so it'll be there as well.
And you're looking for this as titled The Impact of the Transition Rule on Grain Sales to a Cooperative and a Farmer's Section 199A Deduction. It's very important business for you producers to be aware of as you finish up your tax filings for 2018. Mark, Brian, thank you for coming over and filling us in on this.
Thanks, Eric.
Thank you, Eric.
We've been joined by Brian Briggeman and Mark Dikeman. Brian, the director of the Arthur Capper Cooperative Center, and Mark, the associate director of the Kansas Farm Management Association. Agriculture Today will be back after these moments away. You're listening to the K-State Radio Network.
Did you eat today? Thank a farmer. A way to get more involved in agriculture is through 4-H and FFA. Through 4-H and FFA, we have been given multiple opportunities to grow as leaders and learn more about agriculture.
You can learn skills related to jobs, public speaking skills, and you get the opportunity to travel around the country and meet new people.
If you want more information about getting more involved in 4-H and FFA, visit them on their websites at kansasffa.org and kansas4h.org.
Broadcasting from the campus of Kansas State University, this is Agriculture Today. Eric Atkinson here as we look in on today's agricultural news headlines now, courtesy in part of DTN. Well, Two of the nation's top agricultural groups say it is critical to farmers already grappling with other economic challenges that the ongoing partial government shutdown of the USDA and other government agencies would be resolved as soon as possible. The American Farm Bureau Federation and National Farmers Union are both urging the Trump administration and Congress to resolve their disagreements and promptly reopen the federal government. The groups noted the negative impacts the shutdown is having on farmers already dealing with low commodity prices and trade turbulence. Both organizations cited the need for the USDA to begin working on implementing the 2018 Farm Bill, currently on hold due to the shutdown, as a top priority. Now, as the partial federal shutdown continues, more issues are being raised about topics such as commodity trades, food aid, and local farmer committees. The shutdown entering its 35th day today, no resolution in sight after competing bills failed in the U.S. Senate yesterday. Senate Agriculture Committee Ranking Member Debbie Stabenow sent Commodity Futures Trading Commission Chairman Christopher Giancarlo and other members of the commission a letter yesterday expressing concerns about the effect of the commission's shutdown on farmers, businesses, and consumers, saying she was concerned that the shutdown will leave financial markets, including the futures trades, susceptible to undue risks. Now, the National Association of Farmer Elected Committees has written a letter to Farm Service Agency Administrator Richard Fordyce asking why the county FSA office committees cannot function during the shutdown like county employees. That association is a nonprofit organization composed of and led by the elected farmers who run each of the county USDA Farm Service Agency offices. They make local decisions on an assortment of farm program administration matters. In the letter, the organization notes that the county committees are, in fact, the supervisors of the county executive directors in those FSA offices. Add North Dakota to the growing list of states keen to regulate labeling of cell-based meat products. Legislation introduced in the North Dakota House of Representatives would define meat as flesh of an animal born, nurtured, and processed for the purpose of human consumption, and would bar food companies from advertising cell-based meat as a meat food product. The text of the bill says a non-meat product must be labeled as a cultured food product and may not contain the word beef on the label. This legislation has strong backing from North Dakota's beef industry and will be considered this week by the State House Agriculture Committee. The president of the Independent Beef Association of North Dakota, Dwight Keller, says the bill is needed to help inform consumers by defining traditional meat, such as beef. He went on to say, in his words, deceptive labeling could mislead reasonable people to believe that cultured or lab-grown meat is produced in the traditional manner, and it is not. He added, this is about truth in advertising. This measure is similar to proposals under consideration in several other states, including Montana, Nebraska, Tennessee, Virginia, and Wyoming, and is showing a growing trend of state legislatures wading into the regulatory debate over cell-based meat products. 5 advanced beef cattle care and health training sessions will be hosted soon by the Kansas Beef Council during February and March. These checkoff-funded sessions will provide you beef producers with up-to-date standards and technologies to improve animal welfare and food safety. The trainings will be led by K-State veterinarians Dan Thompson and A.J. Tarpoff. The dates and locations are February the 4th at the Anderson County Sales Company in Garnett, February 12th at the Pratt County Fairgrounds in Pratt, February 27th at the Farmers and Ranchers Livestock Commission Company in Salina. Then in March in Winfield at the Winfield Livestock Auction on the 14th of March, and March the 25th at the Atchison County Auction Company in Atchison. All of these meetings will take place at 6 o'clock in the evening. Producers and veterinarians, if you're interested in taking in one of these, contact and register with the Kansas Beef Council 785-273-5225, 785-273-5225. Now, this week's Kansas Wheat Scoop. Here's Marcia Boswell.
Keynote speakers have been announced for the award-winning Women Managing the Farm Conference, set for February 7th and 8th, 2019 in Manhattan, Kansas. Since 2005, this event has been bringing together female farmers, rural business leaders, and landowners. The Women Managing the Farm Conference provides a supportive setting in which women can develop the skills, resources, and knowledge needed for success in a competitive agricultural environment. Conference sessions are designed to keep women up to date on the latest advancements in agriculture and thriving within their rural communities. During the two-day conference, attendees select from presentations covering many topics, including farm finances, relationships and health, agricultural and estate law, crop production and marketing, management, and more. Attendees also choose networking sessions tailored to the different roles women hold, such as agricultural partners and helpers, independent producers, absentee landowners, ag industry career women, and business managers. Optional pre-conference workshops are offered on Wednesday, February 6th. They include sessions about precision agriculture technology, viticulture and enology, as well as introductory and advanced sessions on QuickBooks. The 2019 conference will open Thursday morning with a presentation by Dr. Jason Lusk, a food and agricultural economist who studies what we eat and why we eat it. Other general session presenters for 2019 include attorney Stacy Seibel, who practices estate planning law and will present Designing the Future of the Farm, estate planning to make the farm a perfect fit for the next generation. Dr. Michael Taylor, KSU Associate Professor in the Department of Agricultural Economics, will discuss navigating negotiations. And Amanda Friend, a third-generation family farmer, will discuss managing 3 farm businesses, a dairy farm, a farm market and bakery, and their value-added product, cow pods. Registration for the conference is available at womenmanagingthefarm.com. The Women Managing the Farm Conference is sponsored by various agricultural organizations, including by Kansas wheat farmers through the Kansas Wheat Commission's 2-penny wheat assessment. More information about speakers, programs, exhibitors, registration, and scholarships can be found at the website womenmanagingthefarm.com or by calling 785-532-2560. Keep up to date with the latest Women Managing the Farm news through facebook.com/womenmanagingthefarm. For Kansas Wheat, I'm Marcia Boswell.
Thanks, Marcia, and this is Agriculture Today.
While many people know hunger is an issue in developing countries, it is also a problem in our own backyards. In 2010, 1 in 7 Kansans struggled to put adequate food on the table. 2 K-State research and extension programs are tackling this problem. The Family Nutrition Program and Expanded Food and Nutrition Education Program reach thousands of Kansans in more than 70 counties. They learn how to eat healthy with a low budget. For more information about these programs, visit ksre.ksu.edu.
Coming your way now on Agriculture Today, the latest out of the Weather Data Library here at K-State. Checking in with us once more, K-State Research and Extension climatologist Mary Knapp on this brutally cold winter day in Kansas. This is pretty much the coldest of the season we've seen, isn't it?
Yes, it is. And it's not unusual to have our coldest weather at the end of January, the 1st of February, but it's always a sharp shock when it arrives. We did see some sub-zero readings with the overnight temperatures. According to our Kansas Mesonet, the coldest temperature was a -9 degrees at Washington.
That's an actual reading now.
That is the actual air temperature, not the wind chill. And the winds were fairly strong last night and into this morning, so wind chills were probably a lot colder than that. We had a handful of stations that had that sub-zero reading, ranging from Scandia down to Silver Lake, and others, of course, that were in the single digits. So it was widespread cold across the state.
But because of the way the calendar runs, these cold temperatures aren't accounted for in the weekly overview of where we've been, right?
Right. I continue to do the weekly drought update, even though we're officially out of drought and have been this is our 3rd week, and we like to keep it that way. But I still do that weekly summary to keep a handle on what's happening. And that runs from Wednesday to Tuesday. And so the cold air that we've had the last couple of days won't show up until next week's. We did have a very cold week in northeastern Kansas last week. Northeast Kansas was the coldest division. They were running 4.5 degrees below what they would normally do. In contrast, that cold air didn't filter as far west, and so the western divisions were running between 1 and almost 3 degrees warmer than normal. The southwest division had the warmest temperatures. They averaged 34.6 degrees Fahrenheit, which was 2.6 degrees warmer than they would typically be for this time of the year.
Now, in that same time period, we had 2 separate winter weather events, one roughly a week ago today and then the other this past Tuesday. And so moisture as well, although the amounts weren't tremendous by any stretch.
Well, the amounts weren't nearly so prolific as in our previous winter storm, which we had over a week ago, but we did see 2 divisions that were above average for the week, and that was the South Central and the East Central. The amounts were not as deep as the last one, 0.23 of an inch on average in South Central and 0.27 of an inch on average in East Central. Now, the Northwest Division, the storm that went through Tuesday into Wednesday, won't show up until next week, and they averaged nothing for the period. So, again, very slight amounts in the other divisions, less than 1/10 of an inch on average. But again, we've had quite a bit of moisture in January, so most of the areas are above normal for the month. The only exception is that Northwest Division, and they're running 94% of normal. So again, we're not really in very bad straits at the current time as far as moisture. And it should also be noted, given the form that event came in, where we had a lot of freezing fog, freezing drizzle, it didn't take much to create a lot of travel issues.
Well, we're getting to the point now, you note, Mary, where our weekly moisture totals will tend to accelerate from here forward, you say.
Right, and using Manhattan as an example, when we start in January, our daily average at the first of the month is about 1/100 of an inch a day. As we begin to move into February, we're looking at more for 4/100 of an inch a day. So again, you're looking at a difference between 7/100 of an inch and 28/100 of an inch, almost 3 times as much as you go into a weekly average. And that will continue to increase as we move through February.
However, as we look at the immediate forecast, we're actually going to be in a dry stretch for a while, you say.
Right. The 8 to 14-day outlook, which carries us through the first week in February, is for increased chances of below normal precipitation. We quite often look at the quantitative precip forecast to look at how much amount are we expecting to see, how much are we actually expecting to record in our rain gauges. And the week ending next Friday is basically dry. The outlook is for 0 precipitation across most of the state. Now, we do have a couple of chances for moisture, and so we might push that 0 mark a little bit, but we're not looking at any major precipitation events for the week. The temperatures are likely to continue on the cold side. They're not as likely to be as brutally cold as we had last night, but we're still going to be below average on the temperatures for the week. We'll have a brief warm-up over the weekend, and then we're going to move down into daytime highs in the lower 30s and lows in the teens, which again will be colder than normal for this time of the year, but not brutally cold.
And this warmth this weekend won't do a great lot, you say, to rid of the snow and ice cover that exists out there.
Right. It'll take a while for the snow that's out there, and particularly ice is harder to melt than snow, and so it will take more energy to get rid of that. the big question is how much sunshine we'll see in that, because that solar energy can really aid in melting the existing snow. And at this point, we're looking at having some fairly cloudy days. In fact, on the days where our average temperatures are expected to be the warmest, we're looking at cloud cover at night, keeping the low temperatures fairly warm. And in fact, in Manhattan, we may stay right at freezing for our low temperature before the next cold front comes through.
Well, just about everybody, Mary, is ready to turn the corner to springtime, but a ways to go before we reach that point.
Right. We can have quite a bit of winter weather all the way into March. And as I noted earlier, our coldest temperatures on average are late January through February, and we really don't start seeing that warm up until we get into March and April.
Mary, thank you, as always.
Thanks, Eric.
Climatologist Mary Knapp, K-State Research and Extension, along with us. And we appreciate you being with us as well. Rejoin us on Monday right here, won't you? Until then, enjoy your weekend. Eric Atkinson here for Agriculture Today over the K-State Radio Network.